Great. Well, please keep things going in the chat, everybody. And we'll just get going. More participants will join as we roll along, but I don't think we should wait for anyone. So welcome to this episode of the SDG Talks Roundtable series. This month, we're looking at global water security issues. We've got a stellar lineup here. You can see them all smiling at their camera screens now. I will pass it over to them in just a minute, but just to give a bit more context to SDG Talks, myself, James Armour, and Kevin Sofin, my co-host, have been running the platform for the past year, and it is all about putting a spotlight on various topics related to the Sustainable Development Goals. We've looked at gender equality, we've looked at fashion, at tourism, all sorts of different topics, but today is all about global water security issues. I'm going to also try and remind everyone that if there is anything that comes into your mind, any questions, any comments, any reactions to anything that anyone says, just throw it in the chat, put your hand up, make some noise, and we can put the microphone to you, or we can just read out your question to the panelists. But I think I'm gonna, before getting everything kicked off, just allow each of the panelists to very quickly introduce themselves, what they do for work, their background related to water, basically. And maybe if we start with Jill, we can just go clockwise if everyone can see my screen, from Jill to Claudia, Camilo, Abhishek, and Zahin. So I hand it over to you to introduce yourself, Jill.
Thanks a lot, James, and thanks for inviting me to this community and to these talks. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Jill Raval. I am an associate task manager for the United Nations Environment Program. In terms of background, actually, I got interested in water issues when I was quite young, when I was 19, 20. And I had accidentally come upon an article about arsenic contamination in wells in West Bengal. I'm originally from India, so that's why that region was where I sparked my interest. And in order to pursue the water issues, I moved to the United States and slowly got dragged into studying nitrogen and phosphorus issues in waterways. So just from college itself, I was working on collecting water samples and studying the impacts of nitrogen and phosphorus in rivers and lakes, and also in coastal ecosystems. From there, I started working for the World Resources Institute, which is a big think tank globally. And for them, we were working on physical water risk, actually mapping physical water risks. So you're talking quantity and quality, and helping private sector figure out where they can put in their operations. So in the long term, they're not having operations in water risk areas. So I sort of started my journey mostly with contamination, then pollution. And 6 years ago, I started working for the United Nations Environment Program. And here with UNEP, I mostly work on freshwater and marine issues, and it's all transboundary because you need some sort of custodian or some sort of agency to look at water when it crosses boundaries. So we have projects in Latin America, in the Caribbean islands. We have projects in Central America, and these are looking at wastewater treatment issues, freshwater access issues. And we also have a bunch that look at the connection between the source to sea. So the land to ocean connection, where you're sort of linking your SDG 6 and your SDG 14. In terms of day-to-day job, I actually design projects, and these projects are funded by the Global Environment Facility, which is a financing mechanisms to essentially address the priorities of international conventions. And interestingly enough, water doesn't have a convention. So we are really the forgotten child, because you have the Paris Agreement, you have the Convention on Biodiversity, so you have desertification. So it's much easier. So SDG and their targets mean a lot to us because we don't have this sort of legally binding international convention. So when we get data from countries on the targets for SDG 6, we actually use that information to do the monitoring and evaluation and figure out what's happening where. So yeah.
Jill, I'm very quickly just gonna steal the microphone from you.
Yeah.
No, it was a great introduction, and I'm just gonna, so that I can give everyone else
go ahead,
because you're
sorry,
going into the juicy stuff. We'll save it for 5. But Claudia, if we jump it over to yourself.
All right, so thank you very much, James, for inviting me to join the roundtable. I'm Claudia Coleone. I'm an environmental manager from Brazil, and I have been working in the water sector for over 4 years now. Throughout this time, I have focused on water management and water planning. So basically, I had a very big interest in how governance shaped decisions related to water, and specifically how that is connected to the environment and ecosystem services. So based on that, I started working with river basin management in Brazil, in the Southeast region. And it was a very important learning experience for me, especially because I was part of the team working during the water crisis that hit Southeast region in 2014, 2015. So that really gave me a very good perspective of what water scarcity means and the importance of securing water for all. And I also worked with sanitation projects using water use charges that were collected by the river basin organizations in Brazil. And then I moved to Oxford in the UK to continue my studies. So I have a master's in water science policy and management, and then I got an overview of water management, which really made me interested in acting internationally, but also with a regional focus, which brought me today as my current position as a research associate at the Stockholm Environment Institute. I work here at the Latin American Center, and we've been working in projects in Bolivia and Colombia, where I'm based at the moment, and all of those focusing on water management at the river basin scale and beyond.
Another water expert, love it. Over to Camilo. Camilo, give us the 30-second elevator. What do you do?
Oh, an elevator pitch. Well, I'm Camilo Hunius, or Camilo Uneus Guzman. I'm located in Chile, where you see my background. That's just 1 kilometer from where I am. I am a chemical engineer. I have to have the honor to work with Jill on a transboundary water management project, on the design of a project. I've worked building and designing wastewater treatment facilities, and then moved on to working as a consultant for international organizations, UNDP, the Organization of American States, and the World Bank. And right now, I'm working on an idea that I had that grew from when I was an engineer, which is basically how do you optimize the wastewater treatment, considering or looking at trying to reduce energy consumption and trying to, if you have reduced energy consumptions, how you could build more wastewater treatment facilities, which is an issue, especially in Latin America, as there is no oil treatment. It was like 40 seconds, but.
Super. Thank you very much. Over to Abhishek.
Hello, everybody. Firstly, Kevin and James, thanks for the invite. It's super exciting to associate with SDG Talks again. And also hello to all the speakers and attendees. My name is Abhishek Datta. I originally hail from India. I did all of my undergrad and lived there pretty much all my life. And then I moved to the US for my master's from Yale. And I'm currently a humble PhD candidate at the University of British Columbia, like all the smart people on the call who work with the UNEP or World Bank or entrepreneurs. My primary background is in water and wastewater treatment. I started off with dealing with the qualitative aspects of water treatment, but currently I look more at the circular economy approach to wastewater treatment and water treatment. And my experience primarily is in membrane treatment processes. So a lot of desalination and water reuse is what I focus on. Thanks.
Awesome, Abhishek. Thank you. And over to Zahin.
So yeah, I would say I'm just a generalist. So my training is in mathematical sciences. What I did was basically start a consultancy company, Hydroquo Plus, based out of hydroinformatics in the intersection of computer science and water management, and then execute on specialist consultancy projects related to water quality, water monitoring, hydraulic modeling, and so on. So yeah, it's an immediate pleasure to be around such esteemed guests, and just looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Zahin. Well, thank you for those introductions, everyone. I think we want to kind of get right into this here, really sort of set the scene for everybody into understanding global water security issues. And maybe we can first do that by kind of outlining what the global water issues are in general. I know that Abhishek, working with technologies, maybe you have a good understanding of how these apply and what they're used to fix and what those problems are in the first place.
Yeah, so maybe I can just touch upon this with some personal examples. Personally, when you talk about water security, I look at it from both quantity and quality aspects. So a physical lack of water would be water scarcity. And also the lack of good quality water for consumption is a big water security issue as well. And I want to approach this with a personal example. When I was a child, I come from a city called Chennai in India, which has a population of about 8 million people, which is similar to New York for comparison. And when we were growing up, we were so conditioned to actually getting water in tankers and not having water supply for over 2 days, which was the norm for me. And then I moved to Canada for my PhD, where water is abundant and it's always coming from the tap. And we never think of it in that manner when we're actually living through it, in my opinion. But I think water security issues are very geographic dependent. It depends on the location and depends on the area itself. The issue, for example, in Chennai sums it up really well, because in 2019, Chennai actually approached 0 day, similar to Cape Town in South Africa. And there are multiple reasons underlying that. The first is actually climate change, obviously, because of erratic rainfall cycles. And I think a lot of people mentioned in the chat about drought, which is, of course, one of the biggest reasons for water scarcity in arid regions across the world. And the second reason which was underlying it was conflict. And because the surface water supply to the city was actually compromised because of a conflict between the neighboring province, which was a primary shareholder of that water supply via the river. And it's a combination of multiple factors, including pollution of groundwater, which basically really created a dire situation of water scarcity in the city. So there are multiple reasons, according to me, depending on the area, depending on the water supply itself. So climate change, conflict, pollution of water sources are some of the reasons I can think of which are probably the primary drivers for water security issues right now in the world.
Huge. Does anyone else have any thoughts or comments to add to that? Claudia, you work a lot in Latin America. You're from Brazil, and right now you're sitting in Colombia. How do water issues look over there from your perspective?
Well, thank you very much for the question. I also agree with what Abhishek was mentioning. Super nice to, when we have those personal experiences, I think this is when you really notice the challenge, right? So as you mentioned, in Brazil, my personal experience was living through the water crisis. So just imagine a huge reservoir being completely empty and a metropolitan region of over 10 million people really struggling to have safe, reliable water. And then you would have to think, why is that really happening, right? Why haven't people or water managers thought about this? So I think one of the issues underlying those problems really comes down to planning. And if we think about it, it's not just about building infrastructure, right? It's also about managing the landscape. So if besides the scarcity that will come in many regions because of climate change and other external factors such as population growth, and you combine all of this, if you're just relying on infrastructure, then you might end up with a day zero like in Cape Town, or you might end up with water crisis as it hit in Sao Paulo. And currently now in Colombia, I also see this infrastructure issue very strongly. So if you don't diversify the source, and if you don't look at a more landscape regional scale, you might just be withdrawing from other regions that may be sustaining a lifestyle of a metropolitan region, for instance. You're not considering those local effects. So I think the challenge is definitely one related to natural resources, but it's also related to our decisions at local and regional levels. So yeah, those would be my perspectives as of now.
So you kind of touched a little bit there on the different geographies and different places, and how, of course, you've got transboundary issues related to water. How do you think then it also relates to different socioeconomic groups? And anyone can feel free to kind of jump in on that one.
So for me, okay, I was just reflecting on that. Also, what initially, like, what we mean by like water security, right? So I think just going back a little bit about it, and Abhishek also mentioned some of the aspects. We are usually thinking of tolerable water-related risks to society, right? So what does it mean to have a tolerable risk? So we're talking about the health of our rivers, so that we have good quality for us, for consumption and for different uses, agriculture, for instance. We're talking about these sectoral differences that we have. So a water demand for agriculture, for energy, and for domestic industrial uses. So we're talking about many activities that they can be competing against each other, right? So then when we talk about managing those water-related risks, it's much more likely that richer societies will be able to cope with some sort of risk. They might have the financial and infrastructure capacity to invest, preventing floods or droughts, basically implementing measures that will reduce that risk. But now when we get the definition of water security and we put that in a different socioeconomic context, in a society that's still struggling economically, and putting on top of that the COVID-19 pandemic, and putting on top of that the pressure that we have in terms of like climate change, the challenges that we have in terms of climate change, then those tolerable water-related risks won't be as tolerable anymore, because you still lack that financial and that infrastructure to cope with those challenges. So you won't be able to prevent, you would rather react to those challenges, right? So I think this is one of the most crucial differences when we think about geographies and socioeconomic aspects.
That makes a lot of sense. And Camilo.
Yeah, if I can jump in, I want to bring some, building on what Claudia just said. I want to bring some numbers or an example. In the case of the city of Lima in Peru, the capital of Peru, has 10 million people. Lima and Callao. It's the second biggest city in the desert after El Cairo in Egypt. The city has a water availability per capita of 100 cubic meters per capita a year, which is basically what the people in the most affluent areas of the city do consume. They consume around between 70 and 90 cubic meters per person a year. So what you have is two things. One is that the utility has a table for when they build what is called in Spanish la dotación. How is it in English? Like the amount of water that will provide when they build a network. They say, okay, if it's high income, it's going to be that much. And if it's middle income, it's that much. And if it's low income, that much. And low income is a third of what they will provide to the high income by design. That's how it is designed. And what actually happens is that in the outskirts of the city and the lowest areas, you have water availability per day, water consumption per day, about 50 liters per day, which is the bare minimum, which is actually the recommendation from the International Red Cross Committee for refugee camps. So those inequalities, there's also one physical inequality, physical limitation, which is you just can't provide the same amount of water you provide to the affluent sectors for the whole city. There's just isn't that water. And then the issue, building on the planning, is how do you distribute it? How do you choose who you're going to give it to and when? And those are really complex issues that there's no one straight answer, but it's happening in some cases very like it's not covered. It's just out there. That's the design. That's how we build it. And yeah. when I put that on the table.
Just to get the full understanding there, it's just based on price. So if somebody could pay more when you say that the system is designed that not enough water will reach those low income.
Yeah, it's not even the sign by price, because actually water is subsidized almost the same for everyone. The thing is that the amount of water that they will pump into those areas is different by design. So what happens in the end is like you have water in the low income area only Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, or maybe 6 hours a day or whatever. So.
Wow. Does anybody else have any experiences there? I see, Jill, that you'd unmuted yourself.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, and this is something that's not been mentioned. 70% of the freshwater that's withdrawn is for agriculture. So you cannot talk about water security without talking about food security. And a lot of the issues with water use efficiency in agriculture, it results in pollution. So it also impacts quality. So you cannot, I just wanted to bring to the table that one of the biggest reasons that we are running out of water, or a lot of countries, there are 17 countries right now that already live in water stress areas, is because of the use for agriculture and also industries. So even your cotton is going to take a lot of water. I think it takes 2,700 liters to make a cotton t-shirt. So you can never look at water as an independent thing. It's not like just carbon. It has a lot of contributing sectors. It has a lot of things that need to collaboratively be addressed.
What's the solution there then? Does everybody need to go vegan? Do we all need to stop eating meat? Is it the livestock? Do we need to all buy This is a secondhand shirt. I'm pretty proud of that one. A lot of my clothes are secondhand. Maybe that's a solution right there. What's your thoughts around that?
Actually, eating less red meat, it has shown reduction in your water footprint. So just like a carbon footprint, you can calculate your water footprint. So if the participants wanted, they could Google right now how to calculate your water footprint, and they can see what is it that they're doing is resulting in that level of water consumption. So for example, a pound of beef actually requires 7,000 liters of water, and that more than 50 times what's needed for a potato. So yeah, it is better if you go vegan, or not vegan, but at least vegetarian, or just reduce your consumption. Actually, I'm very neck deep in the nitrogen community, and in the nitrogen community, we have this movement where we are saying half nitrogen waste, and you go Demetarian. So Demetarian is half vegetarian, half meat eater. So we're trying to promote a different type of lifestyle where you reduce your consumption, because food production actually results in a lot of nitrogen being run off into your water streams. That also kills fish. So you're also reducing your fish stocks. So it's a full cycle that you have to think about.
That's see there's a hand raised from Abhishek, if I can jump over to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a point to the socioeconomic issue that you raised. Of course, socioeconomic groups are affected differently in terms of water security. I just wanted to add that while we are all sitting comfortably at our homes, having access to a toilet and a flush, and as well as tap water in your sink, there are women who are walking miles in a lot of developing countries just to get access to that water. And the more the surface water reservoirs dry out, the further they actually have to travel. There was also a recent study from the University of Victoria in Malawi, I believe, where they showed the link between how women have to travel miles to get the water, and also the quality of the water, therefore, that they're bringing back, because of the residence time of the water in the containers that they're carrying, and the time that it gives microbes and pollutants to actually be carried back home. So different, and obviously they don't have the means to treat it after that at their home. So there are multiple challenges that different economic groups face. And therefore the solutions also have to be addressed in that way. For example, affordable technology and subsidies, as Camilo was talking about, and yeah, basically better water pricing governance structures along with better and affordable technology.
A lot of different topics there, and I've got quite a few questions in my mind, but I'm wondering if anyone wants to sort of chip in and build on what Abhishek was just talking about there. one of the interesting ones that I picked up was the need for different stakeholders that you mentioned, and different actors taking a role. What kind of stakeholders really are important here, and what kind of stakeholders take what roles, and how can we drive forward solutions? And that doesn't have to be Abhishek, that could be anyone.
Yeah, sure. So like, I think it is the tragedy of commons, if I may, like to kind of outline water management and water security as a whole, like it, like in order to like really understand that thing from a very holistic level, or let's say on a fundamental level, the stakeholders are everyone and anyone. So it needs to be a handheld approach. And obviously the municipalities, the agriculture sector needs to raise awareness and have certain impetuses in place to create behavioral changes, so that would ultimately accumulate to a collective change. So yeah, so things such as like unaccounted for water, which is a key benchmarking parameter that is usually indicative of operational financial performance of water utility. So and like that, connecting that to like ethics, and then like adding a KPI to it would, like, I think, create that knowledge sharing platform, as well as like a very, again, collaborative environment in tackling this issue.
It's a lot of different people that need to take a role here, and it sounds like agriculture is a huge player. I remember from when we were in China, actually looking at Pakistan from my teammate's perspective, because he was brought up in Pakistan, and 90% of fresh water went to agriculture in Pakistan. And obviously that means that a lot of people further downstream, because it's coming from mostly the river, the Indus River, often can't access that water because it's being utilized and drawn up by agriculture further upstream. So maybe this is kind of coming away a little bit from like what role agriculture should play, or what solutions we can apply to agriculture. But I'm wondering what the experiences are from this group amongst this kind of transboundary water management, and how we can deal with water when it's traveling through different regions or different countries, or across the whole continent, even in some cases. How can we bring in tools and different roles to alleviate these kind of issues?
I can jump in if you
Jill.
want. Yeah, so this is my bread and butter. We do transboundary resource management, and we are doing it in different watersheds, and it also applies to large marine ecosystems. So your Gulf of Mexico, Bay of Bengal. We actually use a planning tool, and it's an international waters planning tool that applies in different transboundary contexts. So the first step usually is to do a scientific analysis, because when you're talking transboundary, countries don't like to talk without data. So you have to collect the right data based on the right indicators, because then it becomes really political. Otherwise, it becomes really political because it's like, no, then you did it, I did it, you did it. You know how it is. So the first step is to do that sort of transboundary analysis. And actually in the Amazon, for example, when we did this analysis, it took 7 years to do this analysis, because it's 8 countries. And it was very hard for the scientific community in Bolivia and Brazil to sit together and be like, okay, so we have loss of glacier as one of the issues. You have soil erosion, you have sediments. There's a range of pollution issues, quantity issues. Once they agree upon these kinds of issues, then they come up with a strategic action plan. And that action plan it's a governing document, but it's so important. And we actually take pictures and the countries sign it as evidence, because you don't want them to go back on their word. So you can only imagine how political this situation is. And based on the action plan, we then go in and implement certain actions. So for example, in the Amazon right now, we are in the implementation phase of this strategic action plan. It's been 10 years to come to this stage. And we are doing a lot of work on monitoring. So setting up your hydromat stations, collecting data for floods, early warning systems, because these kinds of information helps you control demand and supply, essentially. So that's one way of, it's actually the most common way to manage your transboundary resources, and it's the most politically accepted way.
Also, to add to like what Jill said, right? To kind of again simplify that to the three common tools that should be kind of radically adopted now is having explanation and prediction tools. If you can explain the things with a decision support system that is very intuitive, you could then use that as a forecasting method in relation to water demand, forecasting events related to water management, and then create a what if scenario. Because like if I were to like again talk from a very purely objective perspective, it would be that we usually look at things from a very deterministic point of view, that there are set scenarios, set data, and the data might have a lot of, I would say, cognitive biases towards it, which might then again create the decision platform, which would be a bit like misconstrued. So like I guess we need to now adopt a probabilistic mindset, that and have that approach of taking two contradictory scenarios and having the prudence in which we can take the most effective decision, and then again tie that to an immediate key performance indicator in maximizing water utility. So again, hydraulic modeling, hydrometric information systems really go hand in hand, because that really works great in creating that uncertainty modeling. And I guess now that there's been huge explosion of compute power and made available to the public, and cloud computing is available, that there should be again I guess courses available for the masses to adopt and just understand, and so that they can understand where the consumptions are going and everything else. So I'm just kind of generalizing it again, but obviously it goes hand in hand with what I guess Jill said.
Mm-hmm.
If I just may add to that just quickly, actually one of the biggest issues as well is data. Countries don't want to share this data when it comes to how much they're using. We have a project on hold. I'm currently in Mexico City, and there's a watershed between the United States and Mexico. It's the Rio Bravo. The project is on hold for 9 years because they don't want to talk about the supply. They don't want to touch the agreements when it comes to who owns the water and how much water is released from. So it's a really, really big issue. I mean, I totally agree with you when you say that hydro, like doing the modeling, doing the forecasting, but then you're using generic data sets. If you want realistic data, you would need to have countries openly share that data, but they don't want to when you have an upstream downstream relationship. So it's definitely something that also needs to be brought out in at least in the transboundary context.
Yeah, in that sense, if you let me, James, you let me. The thing, although I'm working although right now I'm working on data science, I'm against data and modeling. Why I say that is that it's really useful and necessary. However, given the situations that oftentimes you don't have access because there's complexity in monitoring, politically they don't want to share it with you. Many things can be done without the data. Like we know there's a scarcity, like just close the tap, like don't irrigate so much, like change irrigation systems without knowing the data, because you know what you will do will improve things. Sometimes, especially governments, hide behind the fact that, oh, I don't have a baseline, so if I don't have a baseline, I can't do it. It's like, yeah, but you can take action. Like you know where the thing is heading, and try to improve on the line. And the other thing regarding the stakeholders you mentioned at the beginning is that we must, when in any water related work, not look only at who, but engage with who owns water or who has water licenses or who is like a user. There are many people around that they are not directly related to water, but often impacted. Who is including that woman who Abhishek said that is going to pick up the water and working 2 miles? Usually she's not there in that stakeholder engagement thing, but she's one of the most affected. So it's really important to look at those people that are not like they don't have a paper that says I have water. That's really important.
I just want to
Yeah.
quickly add one thing as well, just to combine the transparency and the stakeholder. I think transparency of data between stakeholders is also very important. For example, if you have an industry stakeholder, how much water consumption actually goes in should be visible. For example, discharge standards, quality standards, water being met, should be openly available for other stakeholders as well, so that everybody is held accountable for how much they're using and what quality of water is actually being discharged, or even in terms of the agricultural industry, for instance. I think water metering is really expensive, but there needs to be ways of actually measuring how much water is being used, and then actually linking that with, say, water consumption laws or water pricing, etc. I think that transparency and stakeholder link is also very important.
I'm going to ask maybe an obvious question for everyone on the panel, but just for anyone else listening in, about water metering and water pricing. Like, how commonplace is it to have water metering? What, obviously it's different by country, but what's the common theme here? I mean, like, I know in Australia you can just it's unlicensed. You could just drill a hole in the ground and take water out, the groundwater. But what's the deal there, and how does it normally play out around the world?
I can talk. Sorry, Zahin, you can go ahead.
Please, please.
No, I just wanted to give a personal example because I live in a city where there are no water meters, which is Vancouver. But and that's also because there is abundant water. So I always think that all of these solutions and looking at government models and all this actually comes into place in a crisis situation, and people don't really look at these things unless the situation actually arises. For example, in 2015 in the summer, there was a huge drought period in Vancouver when they actually considered looking at water meters, and that's when they actually started trying to install them in some houses, but it's expensive. It also depends, is the government going to pay for it? Are individual houses going to bear the cost of the water meters? So it really depends on the need of conserving water. Are there actually any municipal laws that govern the water consumption of every household? If not, why do they actually need to install water meters, right? So it's need-based and also financially very expensive.
And to like add to what I would say Abhishek said, is that we would have to look down to the water technology adoption cycle, right? It's completely different to how traditional technologies, consumer technologies are adopted. So there's this period of applied research, and then there's innovator stage, then maturity stage, and then adoption for the laggards, as they say. So I guess like to really create an immediate need for like deployment of water meters would be to create the interest of the municipal stakeholders to show that how it relates to increasing their non-water revenue related, I would say, and how it relates to also reducing their operating expenditure. So what Hydroquo is also doing currently, we're currently working on a pilot to deploy cost-effective water meters. It's not related to automated meter reading, just like cost-effective water meters that again transmits data to the cloud in relation to the flow of water and supply of water that is going through the household pipelines. And then we see now what we're trying to do is create that data warehouse through which we can ultimately run to see how the water consumption has changed over the month. And if you can tie that to, let's say, a $0 CapEx model where, let's say, we just charge an upfront fee, and based on the operating expenditure of the device, the amount of revenue that's being generated, we just charge a premium. We could then like create that model where the adoption would be, again, widely accepted and then widely practiced. So that's what Hydroquo is trying to do right now. And we need to also look at the technology curve.
And you're saying that could be on a house-by-house basis and it wouldn't be a huge cost?
Yeah, because it's very simple, right? Like if you look into like a typical area of 100,000 residents, and let's say every household has around 50 residents living in it, or let's say 60. And so daily consumption is around 150 liters per individual. But where the problem lies is that for their behavioral change to happen, they need to have access to that data, right? Like they need to see how it's happening. So if you can kind of create, like put the price on water, literally, and kind of tag that to their consumption, they would be more conscious when it comes to consuming water, right? They would not be letting the water run continuously while washing dishes, rather just like have the water stored and then like dip in dishes and typical things, because they want to just pay less water related bills. And so if you could connect the two, obviously it will require a period of like a lot of collective, I would say, effort to do this. But if you could connect the two, where you're actually incentivizing municipalities to increase their water revenue, billing revenue, and also like reducing the consumption and also the billing cost for individuals, and then the hardware, which will be very cheap. You can like anyone can build it right now, or you can just go to China and they'll have access to like wide array of devices. You could then essentially connect those three things, and then yeah, boom, here we are, and then it would just work.
Awesome, Zahin. Well, what do you then think about? We mentioned this earlier in the conversation, but people were talking about climate change, the impacts of climate change, and the likelihood of having changes to temporal, let's say, rainfall, or you might have periods of increased drought, periods of increased flooding. How do we deal with these more environmental impacts rather than just looking at the technology in the plumbing, or how we can, yeah, what's anyone's thoughts there, or
Green infrastructure.
Jill?
No, I was just going to say green infrastructure. I mean, there is a lot of research being done right now on improving your wetland, because they act as natural systems to do the filtration, right? And they're cheaper than investing in great infrastructure. And in many cases, even in like island context, for example, more effective. So you have constructed wetlands, you can restore constructed wetlands are artificially constructed to do this, but they mimic the same thing as a wetland. So more and more nature-based solutions is something that you see thrown around. You have upstream restoration. Actually, Camilo helped us design some of these activities in Central America, where it's the Lempa River Basin, and they actually have a lot of climate change adaptation issues, building resilience. And he was lucky to go on the ground while I sat behind my desk, and he saw firsthand what the community really needed. And maybe he can elaborate on some of these nature-based solutions that we're planning on demonstrating in this particular region.
Yeah, and that was in February 2020, right before everything. And we actually were going to have a workshop with the stakeholders on March. That was canceled, of course, but yeah. So, well, first I want to quickly comment on my bold statement on the data thing. It's basically like, of course, it depends on the context, and it could be really complicated to take action without data. But what happens, or what I see, maybe in the transboundary world is more complex, but in many, like even companies, they're like, no, first do the monitoring, and 6 months later we discuss it. Like, but dude, you can do something now. So I think that is important.
But dude, accountability, it's a big issue. They don't like to be accountable. So that's why you use the data. I mean, if it was us, we would do it, but it's not us.
Exactly. And regarding the climate change and nature-based solutions, actually, as Jill said, and I think Claudia can also build on that, nature-based solutions are being like built and constructed like much more often for this transboundary project in the Lempa River Basin, which is in the Trifinio region, which is Trifinio in Spanish actually means like tripartite point. So where three countries met, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. There is actually a mountain range. So they're going to be piloting quite a few interesting stuff from wetlands for wastewater treatment, located actually near an ecosystem that is affected by cow production. So there's a lot of nitrogen running off and a lot of wastewater running off into a lake. They're going to be built infiltration trenches and trying to copy what is I think you could, Claudia, maybe telling them siempre cosecha de agua. I don't know how that exactly translates to English. Water harvesting, kind of.
Rainwater harvesting.
No, it's like when.
There's a hand up from Zahin.
Claudia, maybe.
I think.
Do I explain it, or do you explain, or Zahin, who explains what? It's not rainwater harvesting. It's different.
Sorry.
Okay. No, it's not rainwater harvesting. Siempre cosecha de agua. I'm blanking on the wording, like seeding, water seeding, and water harvesting, which is basically techniques applied in the Andes for during the wet season in the highlands. You infiltrate the water into the groundwater, and it will slowly seepage into the aquifer, and below,
so
like
you
1,000 meters
runoff,
below, you can later. Exactly. So some of those techniques are also going to be implemented in the project that Jill is mentioning. And it's something that actually the Incas and other civilizations in the Andes did thousands of years ago.
How did they do that?
So basically, what they did, and they still do it today, they go build an infiltration trench, but they build it like a trench, and it's like not wider than that, and 1 meter or half a meter depth, and 10, 20, 30 meters long, and they built quite a few. So when it rains, it will infiltrate into the water, into the aquifer. And they do that by observing where water is, what they call it, where water is born, which is basically where water sprouts or where you find springs below. So they look at below. So here's a spring. So if I build that trench up there, 500 or 1,000 meters up in the hill, I will be able to collect that water from the rainy season, probably in the dry season. Actually, there was a recent study published in Nature where they discovered that if the ancient Inca infrastructure would be rebuilt, the increase of water availability for Lima could be almost 10% if those practices are applied in the headwaters of the
and Lima's a coastal city, right? So you're meaning all the way over the mountains. That is an amazing little story there. Love that one. Claudia, you've got your hand up. Do you want to comment?
Yeah, I was just going to jump in. And also, Camilo, if you can share this paper, I would be very interested to read about it. Because as have been mentioned here, I think there's so much knowledge, traditional knowledge, that sometimes we don't look at, right? So community level, as civilizations, as Camilo was mentioning, the relationship that we have with nature for centuries, sometimes we just neglect it, right? And then the solutions, nature-based solutions, could be a way of recovering that knowledge that has been around for years. And there are different ways to look at it. So as Camilo was saying, like some of those solutions on the ground, but also we can think from a planning perspective to include those indicators early in the process and not after we've had a disaster coming, right? So disaster risk prevention could be a way of reestablishing riparian areas to buffer, for instance, some extreme events, and then you would just save a lot of money by implementing those nature-based solutions early on. But of course, there is also a matter of timing, right? You can't expect to have a forest in 1 year. So it's something long-term. You have to invest on it. And then sometimes from the planning perspective, they always ask, oh, is this really cost effective? What is the cost benefit analysis out of this? But it's planning, and you have to do it at some point. Like Camila was saying, you can do something now, and you're definitely gonna see results later. But it's interesting to see that water environment security isn't, when there's a paper that was published this week, and it just showed that usually this is not at the center of the discussion. It's always other things that are discussed, and then when something goes wrong, you kind of like, oh, I could have done that before. So in one project that I'm working right now in Colombia, we're adopting as one of our pillars early ecosystems consideration. and trying to have that early in the process and not just after everything has happened and then you're going to discuss, okay, we should think about it. And then in Brazil, I was part of some initiatives on payment for ecosystem services, which were also financed partially by water use charges, that were collected by water users across the watershed. And as part of that process, you were also focusing on best management practices in agriculture, as we mentioned. So you're also improving water quality as a result. And you're also putting money back to the same region, right? So you create a different financial mechanism as a result. So you can combine different sectors coming together with these environmental solutions, nature-based solutions.
I'm loving all this buzz about nature-based solutions. It's just almost, it's like if humans just leave, things will return to normal and nature will sort of figure itself out. It makes me think of like, yeah, what's it? Oh, I can't remember the name of the film with Will Smith when he walks through the town and all the trees and plants in New York have grown back, and it's like nature's healed the whole situation. And a really good point you said there about basically the cost to retrofit is a lot higher than if you just install it in the first place. And if you try and come back and fix something later on, it's going to cost an absolute fortune, multiple times more what it would have if you just done it in the first place. We had a question from the audience from Jess Tinkler, and that was whether we think the solutions to water insecurity should be coming more from top down, from a high level strategy of government, or from lifestyle changes. We've talked a lot about agriculture and how agriculture takes a huge chunk, around 70% of freshwater resources in most countries. Of course, we're the people eating the meat. Let's say if it's a lot of meat that's causing the consumption of water. What do you all think there? Is this us to blame, us carnivores? Jill, you're shaking your head. What's your 2 cents?
No, I was just gonna say it's so easy to blame the consumer. And it's a similar story with plastic pollution as well, and I work on that, and it's always like, oh, just use less plastic. I mean, all of those things matter, but it's also the industry and regulation that plays a huge role. And actually, you can't expect industry to do anything without regulatory support. So you have to have that public-private partnership when it comes to addressing actually all of our issues when it comes to environment. So I was reading an article this morning that WRI was pushing some industry to have high performance dishwashing tablets. So you're not required to do your pre-wash. So this is something the consumer does, but it's also something that the industry is helping. So it has to be a joint effort from each and every across the value chain. And Abhishek works on circular economy, so he knows that you can't just have one person to blame. I mean, it's also like you can have appliances in developed countries that have certain water efficiency standards or certifications for their appliances, and that is regulatory. So you see how it sort of fits in the bigger picture.
As a question there, follow-up question there, then, are we not kind of bound by the market forces and the market drivers? Of course, it's easy for an individual to say, I'm going to do a moral good here, but more difficult for companies and corporations or big users of water. How can we force the market's hand? I mean, why is there not a serious why is there not a serious price on water?
There's not what? What did you say?
In many cases, in many countries, there's not a price on water.
They don't want to pay for it. I mean, in the Caribbean, we have a huge issue because, like Zahin said, it's a tragedy of the commons. They look at it as a public resource, so they absolutely don't want to pay for water. There's also a huge stigma in the Caribbean where they don't want to use recycled water. So that's something that's completely behavioral, and that's something you have to do awareness raising. You have to let the people know. And also this developing country topic, right? Again, in the Caribbean, because I have a lot of projects there, they want a flush toilet. They're like, you all had it. Why can't we have it now? Like, of course, the old systems work better, but there are just so many elements. You can't go in and be like, well, your traditional ways worked better, and you conserved more water. They're like, they look at a flush toilet as a higher standard of living and gaining something in their life. So you have to be very, very sensitive to these things as well. But it can't come unless it's regulatory. I mean, I strongly believe governance and private sector play a huge role, and then you go down to the consumer.
Yeah, I wanna touch on that if you let me with two quick comments. One is that with us, Jill, I completely agree, which is that is regulatory. Although you can have many different regulatory arrangements for that. The thing with the price of water, it's true that a user, regardless if it's me showering or a company, if I have to pay for it, I will take more care about it. The thing is that what happens when there is scarcity? Who gets the water? The one who has the highest ability to pay. That's when things get tricky and trickier. And for example, Chile, it's about to start the constitutional process for writing a new constitution starting in 2 months or 3 months. And one of the hot topics is actually the water rights and water property. All it started with conflicts a little north of Santiago, where this happened. Like the local communities didn't have access to water, although the avocado producers did. And the people were having tracked water, and the avocado producers had a reservoir. So that's what sparked the conflict. It's very visible. So in this case, right now, before the constitutional process, of course, there is a lot of discussion about it. Chile has people. Many people say that's the only country in the world that has privatized water. It is the only country in the world that has privatized water, although the US, for example, has California and other states that do, but it's the only one that when the country is fully private. Although there is the market, if I were a neoliberal capitalist and I would like to have a full market on water, even that market isn't, because there's no transparency. I don't know how many rights there are, where they're located, who has it, what's the price when it's bought and sold. That's not happening. So the thing here that will happen for sure is that people do want to ensure the access to water, the human right access first. Then it's coming after the discussion on the ecosystem. Like, okay, yeah, you can have a market if you want, but make sure people have water, and second, that the ecosystem do function, and then maybe you can have the market, but also have the government or local authorities or water councils or etc. like saying, hey, maybe we don't need to produce so many avocados, and we need, I don't know, tomatoes. I'm making this up. But it has to do with participation and planning, and of course you can have a market space. But if you leave it is a full market, for example, it will happen what happens with transportation. If you have a market on transportation, then you have a mess. You need planification, and you can have market mechanisms, but it cannot be free market. Absolutely.
No, you really shut down that idea of mine about pricing water very quickly when you said what happens when there's a scarcity. So that's really good input there. I'm just conscious of time. I'm really liking, you're all coming from such different perspectives. Some of you overlap, but you've all got really unique things to chip into this conversation. But seeing as it's now 5 in the morning or something for Zahin, I can see he's getting a bit tired over there. Maybe we can, I don't know if it's that late, but maybe we can wrap this up. And if you'd all want to have a 30-second to however long, I know you like to drag these things out, which is great, sort of mic drop moment on what you think the future is for water scarcity. How are we going to move forward as a globe, or whatever you want to represent, your country, your continent? What would you like to end this conversation on? And if I just jump over to Jill, because you are on the left of my screen.
I see I'm always going first here. No, I would just like to say simple, like wastewater, don't look at wastewater as waste. It's a resource. And I think that that's the direction that we need to go. We really need to invest in gray and green infrastructure to treat your wastewater and reuse it. And I would actually personally, not personally, but professionally, it would be really nice if the global community comes together and comes up with the water convention. So so water doesn't become the forgotten child, like you put in your description, like water is as important as carbon. So why are we forgotten? So a lot of political and global governance would be nice.
Love it. Abhishek.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Jill because I work in circular economy and resource recovery from wastewater. So there's a lot of water that can be reused. So let's not forget that. I think one important point we touched upon was green infrastructure, and a lot of developed cities especially are looking towards it and trying to incorporate it in urban designs. I think that's really important. On a personal level, I think it's very important to educate yourself about where your water is coming from, what is your water footprint, and actually starting to question municipal decisions. And I want to draw the parallel from the energy sector and how, when we talk in terms of pricing and sustainability, the energy sector is so much far ahead than the water sector because, as Jill mentioned, it's the forgotten child. So we need to start questioning the value of water and things like how much we should be consuming sustainably, and finally also what we can actually get out of this resource apart from just using it. So yeah, I think those are my final parting thoughts.
Awesome. Thanks, Abhishek. And Claudia.
Well, amazing final thoughts here. I would like to echo that and add that, consider ecosystems first and not after. Be proactive and not reactive. So actually plan and implement your planning, because there are so many available water and sanitation plans, especially here in Latin America. We spend a very good deal of time planning, but executing is really challenging. So do that because you already have the plan and you paid for it. And participation, I think it's very important. It was one of the topics that we mentioned. So making sure to consider everyone, not just the typical stakeholders that we are always in the decision-making table, but making everyone see the value of water, as we mentioned. And this value is a value of, it's not just economic, it's cultural. For some communities, it's even spiritual. It provides our food and all of this. So consider the value of water more broadly.
Pura vida. Not whiskey, but water. It's also up there. Zahin, maybe we could hear some thoughts from you.
Right, so I guess to kind of boil it down to from first principles, from like Plato to Newton, it all lies in the concentricity, like the concentric idea of like how the solar system rotates and everything. So it would then again boil down to circularity, and how can we connect the two with biomimicry. So again, we need to go into the root cause analysis, connect that to biomimicry and learn from nature, apply that radical iterate on it, and then create that renewable innovation phase through which we can actually tackle water scarcity from a broader perspective. So yeah.
I love it. Give that man a shovel, get him to the trenches in the Andes. He's ready to get working with nature again. Awesome. And Camilo, finally.
Well, I would say that we often forget, but water is a highly political issue, and I would encourage people, anyone, to engage in politics and engage in the politics of water. It could be from engaging in a political party to a local water association or a local neighborhood association, because in the end, water affects many things in life, and therefore it's really political, and we have to discuss it. Everyone, not only the top government officials or whatever.
Absolutely love it. I just want to say a massive thank you to all of you. Really, really great that you could spend your time to share these thoughts, and we've managed to record this. I know there was a couple of questions that we didn't get around to. I didn't have a wing person with me today, so it was a bit tricky to manage it, but we could see with the polls at least that there was a lot of consensus on some of the thoughts towards these water issues. And I'm sorry that the panelists couldn't respond to those polls. I'm sure you were squirming in your chairs, some of the answers. But yeah, massive thanks to everyone, and we'll share this online afterwards. We'll have the recording, and look forward to catching you all at the next roundtable, and some podcasts that I'd love to follow this up with a couple of different people for a second time for many of you. But yeah, I hope you all have a great evening, morning, rest of your day, and we can catch up again soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot for organizing.